Hi, I'm Carly Ransom with the University of Colorado, Boulder, and today I'll be discussing somatic practices in the arts. We'll discuss the challenges that arts administrators face when implementing somatic practice programs, how they overcome those challenges, and how they can approach funders. What are somatic practices? Somatic means of the body, and so quite often we're referring to music, theater, dance, musical theater. Sub-definitions could include somatic therapy. The word somatic healing is sometimes used colloquially, but not often used by clinicians because it's hard to prove if you're actually healing something. An expanded definition that's often related to social justice or the term somatics in general would be any practice or method where you can embody transformation of the self and the community. So a big key in somatics and that definition is that it's not just about your own self changing, but being able to impact the entire community. It helps us develop a capacity to feel ourselves, which in turn helps us to develop empathy for others as well. Arts, the common examples of where we see this a lot is any kind of breath work, body-mind centering, anytime you do that, which is a lot in the arts. Anytime you're moving in unison with the group, anytime you have musicians and dancers moving together cohesively, and then really any form of dance therapy. So why do we need somatic practices? Well, recently there's been a well-documented increase in depression and anxiety. A lot of it is pandemic-induced isolation. In addition to the pandemic-induced isolation and loss, there's also racial unrest and protest and mass shooting anxiety. You take both of those things combined, and then you also end up with a lot of political polarization. What this has resulted in is a society where a lot of people aren't comfortable coming together in groups. People aren't as comfortable with just simple social situations and simple touch the way they used to be, getting close to people, touching, communicating, coming together as a community. And somatic practices can help with that. And that in turn can help end depression and anxiety, is what several studies show. There's also been a call for culturally responsive solutions. The reading that we did in class, Okun, from 2021, talked about that in great detail. Additionally, by interviewing several nonprofits locally, especially in Aurora, there's a lot of need for culturally centered practices in response to stress. And it's too much to talk about in this presentation about all the different ways that healing practices vary across culture, but let's just say that it's not always talk therapy. The challenges that arts administrators face is that in colloquial use, art healing is already acknowledged. Art as a form of therapy, art to deal with trauma is acknowledged. However, even though it's acknowledged, there is limited scientific studies on healing in the arts in general, and there's definitely limited studies specifically in somatic therapy or somatic healing. Another challenge is that somatic therapy must be done by a therapist. Speaking of somatic therapy, I did an interview with Abigail Lubon, who is a local licensed professional counselor. She has a master's degree in somatic counseling with a concentration in dance and movement therapy. I spoke to her just to get some tips for what we can do as arts administrators. The first thing she talked about was being careful about the word therapy versus therapeutic. She said that if you're working with a licensed therapist, if you use the word therapy, then you're going to have issues like HIPAA-related issues, for example. But by saying therapeutic, you can get around some of those issues. She also said that you should be really clear on your purpose when you're doing somatic techniques. For example, are you working on connection within a group? Are you working on safety, mourning, belonging? These are just a few examples. She also said that it's really important to make sure that you don't take people on a journey that they can't come back from. And that's especially true if you're doing somatic practices without a counselor or without a trained professional. Next, let's talk about how to pitch somatic techniques to funders. First of all, as you're writing grants or pitching to corporate funders or individuals, remember to lead with the community need. Another thing to focus on is the idea of teaming up with professionals. Also, make sure you become familiar with leaders in the somatic techniques, and you can consider referencing their studies in your grant proposal. Resma Menikam is a great one for social justice and racialized healing. He's coined the term somatic abolitionism, and he'll be a great reference for that. Bessel van der Kolk is probably the best known for post-traumatic stress syndrome research. He has decades and decades of research that he's done since the Vietnam War. And then locally, if you want to focus on a local example, Christine Caldwell is faculty at Naropa, and Naropa is I'd say a US leader, potentially an international leader in somatic studies. In addition to having good research, you want to also consider finding somatic friendly funders, because there are programs out there for this type of somatic research, somatic healing, where if you use a term like somatic healing, they're not going to get all weird about it, and they're going to understand what you're talking about. So you can find those funders that will be aligned with your community need. And then if you feel like it's hard to find those funders, you can also consider emphasis on the less clinical, easy to implement benefits. All right, that's a wrap. In conclusion, be sure that you talk to your community about what kind of somatic practice needs they have. Be sure to also team up with your community with that solution. Be sure to find the proper balance between well-researched science and practical application that may not have as much science. I'd like to say thanks to Boulder Arts Commission for the scholarship for this arts administration program. Thank you to Abigail Luban for your interview. Thank you to Cabrina De Jesus for your leadership with Selma, Colorado. And thank you to Andrew Metzstroff for this assignment of creating a YouTube video. It's my first one, and now I can tell my kids that I'm a YouTuber.